Hello to you. I'm Fox 26 meteorologist Remeisha. It is now midnight and I am still here tracking Hurricane Milton, which has quickly made landfall this evening and it is rolling across the Florida peninsula. Of course, it made landfall right around 7:30 p.m. right around Siesta Key. That's about 15 minutes south of Sarasota and about 1 hour 20 minutes south of the Tampa Bay area. So that was a little bit of good news for Tampa. They escaped the worst of that storm surge since Hurricane Milton did make landfall a little bit to the south, but the flooding has been horrific across the Tampa area and they've been dealing with winds right around 100 miles per hour. Here's a bit of good news for tonight with Hurricane Milton. Of course, at landfall, it was a 120 mile per hour category 3 major hurricane right around 7:30 p.m. At this point, as of that midnight update from the National Hurricane Center, it's now down to a category 1 hurricane with 90 mile per hour winds. That is a little bit of good news. It's getting pretty close to Orlando, Florida, though, now just 40 miles to the southwest of Orlando, and it is moving east-northeast around 16 miles per hour. So it will roll across the Florida peninsula fairly quickly. At least we'll get it in and get it out. But while it is over the Florida peninsula, it is producing a lot of wind damage and a ton of flash flooding with several inches of rain. Here is the track. It will continue that east-northeast track. It's going to roll right over Orlando through early tomorrow morning, and it is going to push out into the western Atlantic by lunchtime on Thursday and then continue to move away from Florida and weaken Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening. So we are going to have the potential overnight for more heavy rain and also for that storm surge flooding that we continue to see going on south of Tampa, right around the Fort Myers area and Sarasota and some of those locations close to those cities. At this point, still getting a ton of rainfall across the central portion of Florida, the central Florida peninsula, stretching from Orlando back to Tampa, back to Bradenton. So this is likely going to continue for several more hours potentially, and that is just going to make that flash flood risk even worse. Another big issue that we had for the afternoon hours, we had a pretty big tornado outbreak across central Florida. In fact, you can see some of those tornado icons on the map indicating where we've had confirmed tornadoes. Almost 30 reports of tornadoes across central Florida this afternoon. So that is a massive tornado outbreak. And they were not just very small, brief, weak tornadoes. A few of those were pretty large wedge tornadoes that remained on the ground for a longer period of time and caused quite a bit of damage. So we had that risk. Of course, we've got the flash flood risk. We've still got many spots across central Florida and even northern parts of Florida under flash flood warnings and flood watches. We've had a ton of wind as well. Wind gusts around 100 plus miles per hour for parts of Tampa, St. Pete, and all of that wind has led to some massive power outages. We're talking about, at this point, 2.3 million people without power across the state of Florida. That is a huge number of people dealing with no power for tonight. Just in Hillsborough County, where Tampa is located, we now have close to 400,000 people without power. So this is going to be a huge problem for the state. It's going to take a while to get all of that power restored. I know a lot of crews are on standby, waiting until conditions get a little bit better to start trying to restore that power. But it is going to take a while because that's a lot of people without power. Over 2 million people across Florida now without power. One of the main reasons why we've had so many power outages, we've had a ton of wind with Hurricane Milton. In fact, here are some of the strongest wind gusts that have been reported just west of Tampa Bay. 105 mile per hour wind gusts reported. Venice, a 107 mile per hour wind gust. Sarasota, Bradenton International Airport recording a gust just over 100 miles per hour. Even in St. Petersburg, where we've had up to 16 inches of rain, wind gusts around 93 miles per hour. And in Winter Haven, Florida, wind gusts close to 80 miles per hour. So that is going to amount to quite a bit of damage, most likely, and that debris getting thrown around in the air. In fact, as we go through the rest of the night, here's the latest update with our wind threat, and the Worst of that wind is going to be stretching from Tampa down to Bradenton to Sarasota and over into Orlando and other portions of the east coast of Central Florida as what's left of Milton, which is still a Category 1 hurricane, continues to roll through. The wind field really started to expand and increase in size as it approached the Florida Peninsula, so it really grew. In fact, we're talking about tropical storm force winds 39 to 73 miles per hour, extending about 250 miles away from that center. And even in the middle of the storm, we've got those hurricane force winds that are about 30 to 40 miles out from the center. So that's where you're going to have the 190 to 100 mile per hour wind gusts. But really, the tropical storm force winds impacting the majority of the Florida Peninsula at this point. Of course, where we had the landfall, right around Siesta Key, south of Sarasota, south of that area, that's where we have that highest risk for that storm surge. So that's going to be down around Fort Myers and Sanibel, still the risk for that storm surge flooding. And even up into Tampa, storm surge there up to 6 feet, but fortunately not that up to 15 feet storm surge that we could have had if the hurricane had made landfall a little bit farther north, maybe to the north of Tampa. So Tampa was spared the worst of the storm surge, but Tampa was not spared with the flash flooding. In fact, we've still got a flash flood emergency going on around the Tampa area right now. This does include St. Petersburg, Lakeland, Florida. You can see those areas flashing there. This is not just your typical flash flood warning, which is dangerous enough, but a flash flood emergency, meaning that if you don't take precautions with this flooding around, then you lose your life. So this is life-threatening flash flooding, and it's going on right now. The reason why this flash flooding is so bad, there's been 10 to 16 inches of rain that has fallen in Tampa, St. Pete, Lakeland, Florida, just over the last 12 hours. This system is moving fairly quickly, but it will likely still dump more rainfall during the late night hours, and that means that flooding will only get worse. So I know I've been hearing reports of some roads in and around Tampa and St. Petersburg turned into rivers due to all of that rain. So you can imagine it is a rough scenario in Florida for tonight. Across Central Florida, you can see that rare high 4 out of 4 risk for that flash flooding. So there's a big concern for the flood risk for tonight. Tampa may have escaped the worst of the storm surge, but that flash flooding will be a big problem. So here is the latest track where it's headed into the future hour by hour with our exclusive Fox model. Notice as we go through the early morning hours on Thursday, it's going to roll across Orlando, still dumping very heavy rain across Central Florida. But here's the good news. It quickly pushes offshore into the western Atlantic by late tomorrow morning into Thursday afternoon, and that means conditions will start to improve across the state of Florida, but there's going to be a lot of cleanup ahead, a lot of flooding, a lot of wind damage, and of course tons of people dealing with power outages. So here's where we are so far for this hurricane season. We've had 13 named storms. 9 of those have become hurricanes and 4 have become major hurricanes now. That was Beryl, which at one point was a Category 5. Helene, which was devastating a few weeks ago, that grew to a Category 4. Kirk was a brief Category 4, and now we have Milton. At one point was a 180 mile per hour record-breaking hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, a Cat 5 starts at 157 miles per hour. So it was a monster of a hurricane in the Gulf just a few days ago. Of course, it did end up making landfall as a major hurricane, Category 3, with 120 mile per hour winds. So 125 mile per hour winds. So we are going to be dealing with Milton rolling across the Florida Peninsula during the overnight hours. It is right now about 40 miles southwest of Orlando, Florida. It will remain a hurricane as it rolls across the Florida Peninsula, and it should push into the western Atlantic and weaken late Thursday morning into Thursday afternoon. So that is the good news. The bad news is that Florida is really getting pummeled tonight with super heavy rain, torrential rain. Flash flood risk remains very high, and of course there's still the storm surge and that threat